Humans of the Cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today I want to go more in-depth on FIENDSMITH. This engine is already starting to take over in the OCG. It has immense high-level competitive play potential, and I want to get more into the nitty-gritty on that. A lot of the applications, a lot of the specific decks that I think take the best advantage of this engine because of the way they can connect to it. But we're going to see this engine all over the place, so we might as well get a little more familiar with it like we will in this video. So let's start by running through what the FIENDSMITHs have. It's actually a pretty small core to start. It's 8 cards, but it's a pretty simple core. It's not like super intensive or crazy or anything. So you start with the main deck monster, the FIENDSMITH. He can pitch himself from hand at any FIENDSMITH spell or trap, and then from grave you can like shuffle another light Fiend from grave back into the deck or extract to summon himself back. So yeah, really good card inherently, but good consistency card for this engine. Next you have FIENDSMITH Tractus. Again, another consistency card. This just adds any light Fiend from deck to hand, then you discard a card. I think we can all tell that this is also just like a pretty generic search spell, so specific archetypes that have main deck light fiends really take extra advantage of this card, so definitely keep an eye on that. But other than that, still a pretty solid card. You won't always see this played in every deck. There will be specific decks, though, that really appreciate this card, because not only does it get you to the FIENDSMITH engine, but it can also get you to like their own engine at the same time. Next up, you have FIENDSMITH Sanctus. This card just summons like a light fiend token, but the deck has a link 1, so that technically does get you like into some FIENDSMITH stuff. So this does come up in certain combo lines. Certain versions of this engine will be playing 1 copy of this card as well. And then you have the Trap. This card basically, in my research so far, universally sees 0 play. It's not quite strong enough to even be worth it, and you're just like always rather be searching one of the other spells rather than the trap here. So just doesn't really make full sense to play, but it's there. It's an okay interruption. It is what it is. All right, now we get into the extract. This is where things get really powerful. Like the start of this is like okay, but then you get to the extract and you realize how strong it is. The link 1 contribute itself to special summon a FIENDSMITH monster from hand or deck. We only really have 1 FIENDSMITH monster, but the key here is this card is a link 1 that takes any light fiend. So any deck that can put a light fiend on field can basically connect you back to the FIENDSMITH, get him in rotation, which will get you into some pretty powerful payoffs down the line. Really powerful card. You can also re-equip itself from grave, which is pretty solid because I didn't add this before, but the FIENDSMITH has an extra effect that can like remove, basically pop a card, send a card from field to grave. By sending a monster equipped to it, so getting that for free and just having like a pop later on is actually pretty nifty. But yeah, it gets the engine started, and it's a link 1, and it's fairly generic as a link 1. That's pretty scary. The link 2 takes any 2 monsters, including at least 1 light fiend. So not only is the link 1 pretty decently generic, but this card takes 2 monsters, and the other one can just be literally anything else. You just need 1 light fiend. This card can fusion summon one of your light fiend fusion monsters by banishing the materials from grave. Or shuffling the materials from grave. Sorry. That's pretty good in and of itself. So this card also can come up. This is your smaller fusion that kind of helps you like push advantage. On summon, this card can target a light fiend in your grave or banish and add it back to your hand or special summon it. That's how you sometimes get into your rank 6 lines, where you make this, which is a 6, and you reborn a regular FIENDSMITH from grave, which is also a 6. Boom, easy rank 6 there. Very, very strong. It also burns, so even as a generic engine, this engine does give you potential to win in time, which is really scary as well. And then finally, the actual boss monster of the archetype. You won't always summon this guy very often, but there will be some decks where you play this engine where you do just play 1 of this guy. On field, he's kind of just like a walking Omni, sort of, but it's only on field. He can target like any card and negate it, but that does include spells and traps, I believe. So cool. He's a decent card. If you have to do a line and end on this instead of rank 6s, if that's like the route you have to take. All in all, really powerful engine, but the most powerful thing about this engine, doesn't take your normal summon. Has no restrictions to it otherwise, and is very accessible for basically any other deck to get to. Which takes us to our actual meat and potatoes of this video. We've gone over like the basics of the engine and how it works. Now we need to get into the stuff that, you know, actually puts it all together. So what are the general payoffs for this by playing this additional engine in another deck? There's two main things you can do with this engine. One, you can end on your Lacrimosa guy, or sorry, Diaz Irae. I don't know why I had Lacrimosa on that, whatever. Diaz Irae. You can end on him. Cool. He's a negate. He can actually negate multiple cards at the same time too, so that's not bad either. Decent payoff. Cool. He's your in-archetype payoff. Most of the time, though, you're using it to just make a rank 6. And there's 2 rank 6s that stand head and shoulders above every other rank 6 in the game, in my opinion. The first one is your Wave High King Caesar. Keep in mind this is a Fiend base archetype, so you can just make him the hard way that way, and that's really, really strong. This card is a double negate for any effect that would special summon a monster. That includes Nibiru, and then also just basically versus almost any strategy in the game. That is just 2 negates for 2 engine cards, most likely. Very, very scary as well. This card's legit. This card is really, really strong. It showcased how strong it was actually pretty recently in a couple formats ago when Unchained still had 3 Shavara. And it was already shown off how powerful this card is. We just never had decks that could utilize it, and now we've got multiple. So this card's really, really scary. And so basically this allows this engine to be a free engine that just allows you to beat Nibiru way easier now than you ever did before. That's already a huge piece. And the other one's Beatrice. Beatrice is probably the #1 factor here, and that's one of those things where we're going to get to like the best decks that have the best synergy with this engine. I didn't even include decks that just really appreciate Beatrice, right? Your Light Sworns of the world, your not Kashtira, why can I not think of them? Your Tearlaments, geez, your Tearlaments of the world. I didn't even include those decks because this engine may just be a staple in those decks now, because if you just open the Fiendsmith, you get to make Beatrice without normal summoning. That's really, really good in a deck that just wants to mill. So, yeah, another thing to consider there. But yeah, these are the 3 main payoffs the engine actually gets you. There's other benefits as well. Like I said, the Fiendsmith, the main deck guy, he's able to reborn himself basically every turn pretty freely. And if you still have the Link 1 engrave, he's also a pop on a follow-up turn. So he's a body plus a removal on follow-up. That stuff adds up. Those are the small stuff in the margins that can lead you to more winning duels and stuff like that. And but these are the 3 big things that you're actually getting to turn 1 as payoff off of this engine. All right, from here we move to the best decks that can play this. These are not in any particular order. That's why Valmonica is going to go on here first. One of their 2 small guys. They have 3 main deck monsters, 4 main deck monsters, I think. Now with her, I think we'll get another one in next set. I can't. No, we don't. Is there just 3? I think there's just 3 main deck monsters. Anyway, one of them, and one of the main ones, is a Light Fiend. So, as much as I have kind of poo-pooed Valmonica, I think this could be a saving grace for them. This could be an extra piece of synergy, because these decks that can just plop a Light Fiend on the field via their own engine, just like already doing that, and just turning on the Fiendsmith engine, which is then going to add an extra rank 6 or, the Link or the Fusion monster to your board, what you already were doing anyway. That's pretty dang good. On top of, if you just draw the Fiendsmith, you're just making your deck nib proof, all that other benefit, right? So we'll see. I haven't seen it all put together yet for Valmonica, but like there's a world where Valmonica is significantly better because they combine with the Fiendsmith engine in a very smooth way. Next up, Cyberse. This is a really fun one as well. There's 2 main interactions that I think are the most important here. The first one is Draconet. This is a Cyberse monster I actually saw play a couple years ago. Basically, on normal summon, it summons, I think, any level 2 or lower vanilla monster. It doesn't check any other stats. It just needs to be a level 2 or lower vanilla. And that's where you summon the White Duston, which is just a level 1 Light Fiend. Pretty basic and simple. So you already have a Cyberse body on field to then just do some generic basic Cyberse plays that gets you a good amount of advantage. But then you also just, also go straight into the Fiendsmith package to get your payoff off of that. It's pretty good synergy. There's another interaction as well where you can use 4-month skipper to reveal the Magical Musketeer Link one to copy its name. Then you link into the Magical Musketeer Link one. You don't even worry about using its effects, but then you can use that Link one to link straight into the Fiendsmith Link one and have a play from there. And then also you're triggering 4-month skipper to get a search for something like a parallel exceed on top of then just getting into the Fiendsmith engine as well. It's a pretty good interaction, and both of those 2 cards are the 2 big synergies that tie it all together. Sign Up Mining on top of that, you've got 9 ways to get into the Fiendsmith engine without even drawing it, which is pretty good. Next up, Fabled. This one's super basic. I don't expect Fableds to be out of this world, but they're certainly better. Before this, there was basically no reason in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whatsoever to play Fableds over Dark Worlds. I think this could make for a legitimate case for you to at least consider it. Consider playing Fableds over Dark Worlds now, because they have such good synergy. In fact, a monster that the Fiendsmith engine almost always plays is already a Fabled monster that you were probably playing anyway. So even then, a weirdish kind of brick card is not even a brick for Fabled. So that's cool. Yeah, I don't know what their full payoff is, to be honest. I'd have to have somebody show me what Fableds actually do with the newer cards they got a year or 2 ago. But other than that, I think that's fun for them. That's cool. Live, and then we get to the 2 decks that I think are probably ranked a little higher than these. Actually, I do think the Cyberse version could actually be decent. I saw a dual replay video of it recently, and I was actually a little impressed with how it performed. But yeah. Anyway, Live Twins. Live Twins are super interesting. It seems like they don't have to play sprites. They don't have to play with Runics. They don't need to be combined with these other engines. You just play a small Fiendsmith package, which is very interesting because that becomes one of these decks where you can play 20 non-engine cards, because the Fiendsmith engine being kind of minute, plus the Live Twin engine, 20-ish cards maybe in the main deck, and that leaves a ton of space for non-engine, or maybe another engine if you want to throw that in there as well. If you still want to play a small sprite or whatever engine in there, you can. But yeah, this engine, the Link 2s are already like Fiends, and you have no problem. You link them off anyway to keep climbing in the deck. So at points where you would have linked them off before for to link up into something else in the the Live Twin engine, you're going into the Link 1 and then just getting the Fiendsmith stuff online as well. It raises the ceiling of what Live Twins are able to do, and the ability for a deck like this to not lose to Nibiru, not nearly as hard, which is also very welcome for a deck like this. So I think this is actually a pretty decent buff. We could actually see Live Twins come back into the format as a respectable rogue deck again. That's cool. And then Musketeers is my personal favorite from this list. I've always wanted them to get support. This support helps a good bit. This is, and also the other thing too is I think specifically for Fableds, Valmonica, and Magical Musketeers, Tractus is actually pretty important because that's just now a Rhoda for them. It's just a straight up Rhoda for light Fiend decks. So those decks just now get to their best monsters more consistently now. Which is really nice. So Magical Musketeer is definitely no exception there. So Tractus is probably a 3 of in the deck regardless, on top of just being able to play the actual Fiendsmith stuff as well. It's really nice. Honestly, I don't know. Musketeers could be back as a rogue deck as well. I really want to mess with them. I think the consistency that this engine adds to them could potentially put them in a place where we're able to lower the number of the musket spells and traps, and even the main deck monsters, because sometimes that's how you ended up bricking, by drawing too many monsters or too many spells and traps without a monster. That's how the deck just lost games for free. But because of the addition of consistency and potency from this engine, you may be able to cut down on both of those and really streamline the deck in a better way it's never been able to do before. So those to me are the 5 decks that I think make the best use of this engine, just because they throughout their engine get you to the engine without having to just make the generic Link 2. These decks do it without having to sacrifice anything, right? Any of the decks you would ever consider, and I think it's important to note that we're gonna see Snake Eye. We're going to see Snake Eye Fiendsmith. We're going to see, you name it, literally any deck that doesn't lock you out of being able to use the Fiendsmith stuff. We're going to see it because the engine's that good in generic. But these decks do it better. These decks just more smoothly transition into that engine. So I figured it's worth mentioning. All right. Then as far as the generic extra deck ways to connect to it, this is a Link 2 that we don't actually have yet in the TCG. We might get it imported in an upcoming set, I would guess, but we have no timeline on that. It basically takes any 2 monsters, and it's a light fiend. It's like a smaller version of Underworld Goddess. It can help you link away with 1 more monster your opponent controls when you're making Underworld Goddess. But other than that, it's basically just a generic link 2 you can make and then link down into the Fiendsmith engine, right? So that's why these decks are better, because they don't have to link up into a 2 and then link down into a 1 and kind of lose a little advantage to get you into the Fiendsmith stuff. These decks do it much more naturally. There's also Exciton Knight. It's a rank 4, generic rank 4. And then there's also this guy, the Brass Djinn. Same thing, but rank 3. So, to be fair, if you were ever even looking at these 2, you could be like, well, if I had 2 monsters, I could just make this anyway. So this one's definitely the best one. It's the most generically applicable one. But I figure it's worth mentioning these just in case. Especially Exciton Knight, because even going second, theoretically, you could, like, wipe a board with Exciton Knight and then just link straight into the Fiendsmith Link 1 and then just pop off into the Fiendsmith engine after wiping the opponent's board. It's kind of nasty. But yeah. Alright, and then the main deck connectors. The first one is Fabled Lurie. This is the Fabled card that you're probably already going to play in the Fiendsmith engine, because this card basically just says if it's added from deck or if it's discarded, it summons itself back to the field. So if you do play Tractus, right, you would go, if you open the Fiendsmith, you would pitch him to search your 1 of Tractus. Then you'd use Tractus to search a Lurie, and then it adds him, then discards him, and then he immediately summons himself back. So you already have a Fiendsmith engrave, and now Lurie can link right into the link 1 to get you your second one, and then the Fiendsmith engrave can revive itself, basically giving you your simple rank 6. There's the idea there. Yeah, so he's pretty important there. The other one's the White Duston. This is for a couple things, like we talked about the Draconet summoning this, but technically certain decks could just play Unexpected Die just to summon this super quick. Gets you a Light Fiend engrave, gets you the Fiendsmith from deck out of there, and like you just kind of keep going from there. It does get that engine started. That's something. But these are basically it. There's not a ton of main deck connectors that really make a lot of sense. The other main ones that made any sense whatsoever were just these cards, just because they are archetypal and you can search them out via their own archetypes anyway. So way easier to get to via the engine. And the other things that are interesting for sure, and these are probably more side deck interesting cards, with Tractus specifically, is this engine does have a generic Light Fiend Rhoda, so a deck that maybe struggles in certain matchups, you could tech 1 copy of cards like these in there. Archfiend Eccentric and Santa Claus. These are Light Fiends that are just searchable off of Tractus now. So being able to search a Santa Claus, clear a monster that's a huge problem. If if Pearly is back into the metagame, whatever, you can search Santa Claus now with this engine. If there is, skill drains running around in certain decks, right? Anything like that. Deck lockdowns kind of running around. You wouldn't be able to search this under deck lockdown, but that's not a best example. But versus another Floodgate. Whatever Floodgate comes up next, right? Just search this, boom, this goes after 1 back row. So certain decks like that can definitely appreciate that. The other thing, too, is if you play a Fiendsmith deck, you have to be weary of Santa Claus. You may have to play Kaijus in others, like, you know what I mean, in that situation, just anybody, because if you're not sure and you give a Fiendsmith deck Santa Claus, they're just going to go straight into the link 1 and get free advantage off of the Santa Claus you give them. So you just definitely have to be wary of that. You have to make sure you're not in a matchup that already plays the engine. But other than that, it is pretty cool to see. But yeah, that's kind of where I leave it here. That's kind of everything I had covering today for the Fiendsmith engine. It's really good. I've seen some multiple decks messing around with the engine. I think generically it's going to be playable in basically any deck that doesn't lock you. But I think these decks do it in a more fun way, and I think some of these cards are pretty interesting as well, like these down here. But we'll obviously have to see where we go from here. It's still kind of newish in the OCG, so we'll have to see as their format develops even further where they go with it, how they utilize it the most. But that's the only time will tell on that. But we're out of here for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, guys, let me know your thoughts down below on the Fiendsmith engine. Let me know if there's any other tidbits you think are interesting and worth noting about this engine. I'm still just scratching the surface on me looking into this engine, so there is so much more about it, more, lines and stuff you can take with certain decks and cool things you can do. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts if you have any nuggets of wisdom to drop there. But other than that, let me know your thoughts on this engine overall. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Peace.